Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. The fact that the oil price has more than halved over the past 2 years is great news if you're an oil consumer. But it's alarming if your priority is to wean the world economy off carbon-emitting fossil fuels. My guest today is one of the world's most influential observers of the global energy market, Birol, Executive Director of the International Energy Agency. Does cheap oil make decarbonizing the world economy even more difficult? Birol, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
Seems to me you have the zeal of the convert. You began your professional life in the energy business working for OPEC, the petroleum exporting countries. Now you run the International Energy Agency, and you seem to be somewhat obsessed with encouraging your members in the rich world to transform their economies away from carbon. Is that a fair summary of the journey you've been on?
It is almost fair, I should say. Energy has a big responsibility when it comes to climate change, because more than 2/3 of the emissions causing climate change come from the energy sector. Without fixing the problem in the energy sector, we have no chance whatsoever to solve our climate problem. Therefore, as a human being, as a grandfather, I would like to see that our climate is protected, and the way to protect the environment goes through suggesting, advising smart energy policies to move away from carbon.
Right. So in the old days, when the IEA, the International Energy Agency, was set up, it was basically designed to be a lobby group for the rich countries of the world to ensure the security of oil supply and the stability of the oil price as best they could. These days, you say that you want it to be an international hub on clean energy. So you're completely rethinking what it's all about.
That's completely true. I started my new job as of September the 1st, and there are two major new priorities for the IEA. The first one is we have been known as the organization of the rich countries,
and the oil consumers, the net importers.
Exactly. But now we are opening our doors to emerging countries. For example, China, Indonesia, Thailand became our associate members. Mexico, a major oil producer, is going to become a member of the IEA. And at the same time, while we have pole positions in the traditional energy technologies such as oil, gas, coal, it is now time IEA, the most influential energy organization in the world, becomes a hub for clean energy technologies and energy efficiency, which is also very important.
Yeah, so you basically want to encourage your members to get to a sort of post-carbon economic model. But the problem is that still, it seems, there is a very clear and obvious correlation across the world between economic growth and use of carbon and carbon emissions. You know, that correlation has not yet been broken.
I think there is a slight good news here. But in theory, you are completely right. When we look at the last 4 decades, whenever the global economy grew, so did the emissions. We had 3 exceptions. When we hit the financial crisis in early 1980s after the oil price shock, the early 1990s Soviet collapse of Soviet Union, and third, 2009, when there was a financial crisis. But, as IEA rightly estimated, 2014 and 2015, last 2 years, global economy grew 3%, but the global emissions stay flat. For the first time that we see a divorce, a happy divorce, if I may say so, between the economic growth and the emissions.
But those are, in a sense, backward-looking figures because they reflect the years previous.
Yes.
What we're in right now, and have been for the last 2 years, is a plunging oil price. You know, it was well over $100 a barrel. Today, as we speak, it's around $46, $47 a barrel. And that means that, frankly, once again, it is cheaper for people to turn to traditional fossil fuels. Oil and gas are much cheaper. It is therefore economic for people to use them in a greater way again. So the happy divorce you just talked about may have been short-lived.
I hope not, because some divorces are happy and with some good results. And here, the reason why we have seen a divorce is because renewable energies penetrated the markets very, very strongly. Wind, solar, hydropower. And renewables are not anymore a romantic story. They are mainstream fuels. And efficiency became very, very important. But they were driven, as you said, with the high oil prices. And now we are entering an era. Not only oil prices are low, but also other fossil fuels. Exactly. Coal and gas, they're all low as well.
And you can sing the song of renewables, but as I understand it, if you take the global energy mix today, renewables still only represent less than 20%
yes.
of overall energy use,
exactly.
which means that 80% is still traditional fossil fuel base. Exactly. So when fossil fuels become cheaper, seems to me a logical conclusion that once again we're going to see the trajectory of emissions go up.
I hope not. There is definitely a question that the lower fossil fuel prices can complicate the transition to clean energy fuels unless governments do not take the measures.
I mean, sorry to interrupt, but why, for example, would companies invest in electric car technology? It's very expensive. We know some companies like Tesla are doing pretty well with it, but why would the next generation of investors look to that sector when, as far as we can see, a much lower oil price and therefore petrol price is a reality for years to come?
First of all, I believe the oil price may well rebound sometime soon. But in any case,
do you?
Yes, I think 2017 may be the year where we see the rebound. But in any case, in the absence of government support, electric cars will never be able to compete with the cars we have now, internal combustion engines. There's a need for government supports. And this is what I want to say. In Paris, we had a very important meeting, the climate meeting, climate summit. 190 countries signed the agreement. And what they said is, we want to save this planet. And now, since the fossil fuel prices are low, there's a big test, litmus test for those governments, whether or not they are serious what they say, whether they will continue to support the clean energy technologies, renewables, energy efficiency, and other clean energy technologies.
Well, we'll get to that and your analysis of where governments sit in terms of their seriousness in just a minute. But I do, because you are a very influential voice in the markets, I want to hear what you think is going to happen to the oil and gas price over the next 5 years. You're suggesting that it's actually going to rebound quite significantly?
What is happening is that in the last 2 years, oil investments are declining year by year, 2 years, 2015, 2016.
You mean investments in exploration?
Exploration, production, which means that when we need oil in the next few years, when the demand goes up, we may have difficulties in the markets. And we have not seen in the history of oil that 2 years in a row, oil investment did decline. So we may well pay a high price for that.
But haven't the rules changed somewhat? Because now one of the huge new producers on the block is the United States with shale oil and gas. And that, as I understand it, is pretty easy to switch on and off.
It is not very easy. They need some time to adjust. They need about 1 year or so in order to see a price level about $60, $65 in order to come back. In fact, when I say the investment did decline, the biggest hit came to the United States and Canada and other high-cost producers.
Just sticking with the energy market for just a little while,
of course.
In a sense, what we've seen in the last year or so is a battle of wills between the big, traditional, relatively cheap producers dominated by Saudi Arabia and the OPEC producers. And on the other side, particularly the United States, who've developed new sources of oil and gas and who aren't sort of tied into the same system. Now, the Saudis have continued to produce at a very high level because they just appear determined to knock the Americans out of the market. In that battle of wills, who is winning and who will win?
When we look at the results today, it seems that there is a significant decline in the production outside of the Middle East, especially United States, Canada, Latin America, Africa, soon in Russia. Therefore, the world's reliance on Middle East countries will increase in a low price environment.
So the Saudi strategy of maintaining their market share, even with lower prices, is a winning strategy if they're prepared to take the short-term pain of seeing their margins reduced.
Yes. I think this strategy shows that at low prices meaning $50 or below, many of the high-cost producers would suffer, including the US shale oil, including the Canadian oil sands and others. But of course, many countries have different level of impact from the low oil prices. There are losers, there are very bad losers, and there are winners. Losers are Saudi Arabia, UAE, Brazil. Very bad losers are Nigeria, Venezuela, Angola, Russia. And there are some countries who benefit from that. India, for example, or Japan or Europe, their balance of trade improved substantially from the low oil prices.
We'll move on in a sec, but just, I always, when I meet you, want to know what your vision is for the oil price going forward. So let's say 5 years from now. We're at $46, $47 a barrel now. Where will we be in 5 years' time?
By law, I cannot make a forecast on the prices, but what I can say is that I would expect the oil prices, for example, this January, they were about $30, $35. 10 years, 5 years staying at this level is not a realistic expectation. We should expect upward pressure on the prices.
All right. Do you want to put a figure on it? I mean, we're talking back to 100? Is that conceivable to you, or is 100 history for at least quite a long time?
I wouldn't say anything history in the oil market. Sometimes history is the future, sometimes future is the history. So I would say that we will see an upward pressure on the prices from the levels where we are now.
Let's not just talk about oil, because from the beginning of this conversation, we've talked about your desire to encourage your members in the agency to clean up, to reduce emissions and reduce reliance on fossil fuels. But it's not just the low oil price that's a problem. And coal is unbelievably cheap around the world. And if we look at the consumption of coal, yes, it's going down in Europe, but it's huge in countries like India, which is a very, very important part of the world economy now. So isn't that another problem for your vision of a clean energy future?
Very much so. But first of all, I should say that my vision is not only limited to my members, but the entire world. And we talk with India, with China, and with other countries who use a lot of coal. In fact, you are completely right. Today, about 40% of the electricity generation comes from coal worldwide. The biggest, by far the biggest share. And it will not go from one day to another to lower rates. And there are some countries like India.
But if it doesn't come down, isn't this vision that was laid out in Paris for getting global temperature change, warming, not just to stay below 2 degrees centigrade, but actually to aim for 1.5 degrees centigrade, that is totally and utterly impossible given the world's current reliance on coal.
You are completely right. Therefore, it is the reason why we are saying that one should ban the construction of inefficient coal-fired power plants only in some countries.
Well, have you told the Indians that? They're building one.
But I was coming. I told the Indians that they should be able to build efficient, high-efficiency coal-fired power plants which emit less CO2 emissions. You cannot say India or any poor country where you have 320 million people have no access to electricity, don't use coal because you are putting emissions in the atmosphere. United Kingdom, United States, Japan, China, they got richer by using a lot of coal and putting in the atmosphere. For the countries who are now developing, we cannot tell them don't use it now. If we say so, we have to find some solutions to them.
There is no large-scale, commercially viable carbon capture and storage technology out there, least of all in the developing world. So how on earth do you think India can build a coal-fired power station a week and be part of this clean energy future you're talking about?
So first of all, India, of course, if they built carbon capture and storage,
yeah, but they don't have it.
It would have been very nice. But what they can do is they can build high-efficiency coal-fired power plants, which reduces the emissions. This is number one. Number two, we shouldn't see India only building coal-fired power plants. They they have one of the very aggressive programs in the world in terms of solar power, and also nuclear power, which doesn't emit CO2 emissions. Therefore, India is a whole, and we should look at India in the bigger picture, a country where 320 million people have no access to electricity. So therefore, we should put things in the context. But in the rich world, when you look at the US, Europe, other countries, we see the share of coal is declining very rapidly. In the United States, big decline of coal.
Sure, but they're exporting it. They're not digging it out the ground. They just sell it to the Indians or other.
Some of them they export it, but internally it almost collapsed. It is replaced by natural gas, to be honest with you.
It raises an interesting question. You've talked about the onus on the Indian government to deliver, if it is possible, as you say, high efficiency coal-fired power stations. Some would argue that any coal-fired power station is going to be bad news, however efficient it is. But there are real questions for the rich world too. For example, here in the UK, right now, as we speak, there is a very sensitive discussion in the north of England about whether to undertake fracking, this sort of process to deliver the shale gas from under the ground. The government has put a ban on it. The ban may be lifted. It is said that there are potentially trillions of cubic meters of gas under the north of the UK. With your influence and your knowledge of the energy markets, does it make sense for a country like the UK to invest in fracking?
The United States, as a result of fracking, made a big revolution, and as a result, their emissions went down substantially. Coal has been replaced by shale gas, which is produced through fracking technologies. Australia doing exactly the same thing. And if in UK we can produce shale gas using right sustainable fracking technologies with strict regulations, which can be done, but in that case...
That's highly dubious. There are a lot of environmental campaigners who look at what has happened in the United States and say the evidence is that you cannot help but contaminate water supplies and create other environmental problems to do with all of them.
You can do it if the companies are not greedy, if they invest a bit more than they normally would invest, and we calculated 7% more capital investment would mean all these environmental problems can be addressed, minimized if not fully disappear, but this would require strict government regulations.
Isn't the bottom line this, that the only way to deliver the cleaner, decarbonized energy future, which you've talked about from the beginning of this interview, is to put a meaningful price on carbon, a carbon tax that is mandatory around the world, not just in one country, not just in the European Union, but a global carbon tax?
This will be the best solution for everybody, but some best solutions and the realities of life, there are some divergence in that. If you want to put a global carbon price, you have to convince the emerging countries which may suffer under the carbon price, and to put an architecture like that may take time. If you don't
let's be perhaps a little more direct. It's impossible. And here's the words of Sir David King, the for UK, as was UK climate change envoy and specialist. He says, "I simply do not see India, China or South Africa coming in with a sufficiently high carbon price to drive them away from their reliance on coal." It's not going to happen.
I'm not as pessimistic as David, but I would say that it's a very long shot. And if it is done, it is implemented only in the OECD world, in the rich world, there will be major difficulties of competitiveness. So therefore, as some companies do, to put all the accent on the carbon price or nothing may mean that the government regulation may escape in the meantime, and we cannot put enough emphasis on the government regulation and efficiency improvements.
Yeah, as you just said, there are real problems here with trying to convince everybody in the world that it's a fair playing field, that competitiveness is being maintained. I mean, in the UK, we have a Chancellor of the Exchequer who's taken money away from investments in certain sorts of green initiatives. You know, he's reduced subsidies for solar, he's reduced subsidies for onshore wind. There is suggestion that he believes that some of this green commitment has got in the way of economic growth. That's a problem, isn't it?
That's, in fact, I should say, many renewable technologies, onshore wind, compared to 5 years ago, the cost went down by 1/3. Solar PV, cost went down by 80%. The amount of subsidy...
You said governments need to maintain their commitments to this.
Yes, they should continue to support, but at the same time...
But the sign is governments are not.
But you shouldn't... The support you give today may be well different than what you gave a few years ago, because they are becoming much more economic. But you should support them, continue to support them, especially the projects which need a kick-off subsidy. But to subsidize the production throughout the lifetime may be something which requires a second thought.
Never mind that sort of nuanced debate in the UK about maintaining subsidies. There's a bigger elephant in the room, and let's name it, Donald Trump. If he won the United States presidency, he's already said he would, and I'm quoting him now, look very, very seriously at a minimum at the agreement made in Paris. Maximum, I might try to do something completely different, i.e. withdraw the United States from that agreement altogether. How worried are you about the possibility of a Trump presidency for the global energy future?
Yeah. When we look at Paris, it was a great success. All the countries signed it.
Not according to Donald Trump, it wasn't. It was a major
there
mistake.
Were leaders of that success story. One of them was US, the other one was China, supported by European Union countries. And I think the US leadership, President Obama's leadership, was extremely instrumental for the success story. And I hope that the government of the United States signed that agreement, fulfill its promise, whoever comes to the White House.
What would the impact
I really
be?
hope that somebody comes to the White House who takes the climate change seriously and helps the world to fight this very important challenge in front of us.
Very briefly, what would the impact be? How negative, in your view, would it be if an American president reached the White House and tore up the Paris Agreement in terms of America's commitment to it?
I told you that upon your question, lower fossil fuel prices will complicate the transition to clean energy technologies, and such a scenario would further complicate the transition to clean energy technologies.
Yeah, we've got to end in a second. I want to come back to this fundamental point you make, that you believe the last 2 years have given us a signal that it is possible to decouple economic growth from rising carbon emissions. Where would you say the biggest challenge is today? Is it in the United States? Is it in China? Is it in India? Where is the biggest challenge?
I think it is more the emerging countries, such as China, India, and more Africa. And these are the areas that we need to help. They need economic growth, prosperity. People need to have better lives with a low carbon footprint. Africa, for example, when you look at the history, as I said, all of the countries became rich or have a certain welfare by using fossil fuels. Africa can be the first region in the world which can realize its economic development by using renewable energies mainly, because...
You mean miss out the phase of reliance on carbon altogether?
Exactly, because of two reasons. First, Africa has huge renewable energy resources. And second, now the cost of renewables today is much lower than it was 20 years ago when China started to grow, or before when US or Europe started to grow. So Africa can be the first region in the world can grow by using mainly renewables. Of course, they will use gas and other things, but it can be hydropower, for example. Solar and wind are key options there.
Yes or no? Can we keep below the 2 degrees centigrade target?
I very much hope so, and we as the IEA will do everything to advise the governments to do so.
Fatih Birol, thank you very much for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.